The Grand Corinthian Concert Hall was a temple built to worship sound, but on this evening, it felt more like a courtroom. Its gilded arches swooped towards a ceiling painted with cherubs and muses, and crystal chandeliers dripped light onto rows of velvet seats. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident murmur of the city's cultural elite. They were here for the annual National Voice Gala, a prestigious event where new talent was discovered and fortunes were made. Into this sea of silken jewels walked a ghost from another world. Her name was Celia, and she was as out of place as a wildflower in a meticulously curated rose garden. Her dress was not a designer creation, but a simple dove-gray garment, immaculately clean, but softened and faded with age. It seemed spoke not of haute couture, but of careful hands that knew how to make something last. She clutched a worn leather portfolio containing a single sheet of music. Her knuckles white, her posture a mixture of quiet determination and a lifetime of trying to take up as little space as possible. They saw her before she even reached the main foyer. Mrs. Beatrice Cromwell, the gala's chairwoman. A woman whose diamonds seemed to glitter with disapproval, spotted her from across the marble floor. Her face, a mask of powdered condescension, tightened. She leaned over to her daughter, Isadora, a younger, sharper-edged version of herself. "Good heavens, Isadora. Look at that," she whispered, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Some people have absolutely no sense of occasion. She must be lost." Isadora's laugh was a brittle little sound. "Lost, mother, she looks like she wandered in from a Dickens novel. Perhaps she's here to polish the silver." They watched as Celia approached the registration desk, her simple, practical shoes making no sound on the polished floor, a stark contrast to the sharp clack of designer heels all around her. The woman at the desk, taking her cue from the formidable Mrs. Cromwell, looked Celia up and down with a barely concealed sneer. "May I help you?" The tone implied the answer was no. Celia did not flinch. Her gaze was direct, her voice soft, but clear. "I am here for the competition. My name is Celia, number 27. The registration woman blinked, then scanned her list with exaggerated slowness, as if expecting the name to have been a mistake. She found it, and her eyebrows shot up. "I see," she said, her voice dripping with skepticism as she handed over a small numbered card. "The stage door is that way. You can wait with the others." The dismissal was as sharp as a slap. Celia turned. She came face to face with Mrs. Cromwell and Isadora, who had positioned themselves to intercept her. "Excuse me," Mrs. Cromwell said, her voice artificially sweet. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. It's a private event for our patrons and registered performers. Public viewing is tomorrow." Celia looked at the powerful woman, her eyes betraying nothing but a calm, steady light. She held up the card. "I am number 27. Isadora stepped forward, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Mother, it's probably one of those charity entries, a feel-good story for the papers. Let the poor woman have her moment. It will be amusing if nothing else." The cruelty was casual, effortless. They spoke as if Celia wasn't there, as if she were an object, a piece of decor that was slightly out of place. This is a story about how the quietest person in a room can make the loudest impact. If you believe that true worth is not what you see on the surface, make sure you subscribe to our channel and like this video, because you are about to witness a moment of unforgettable vindication. Celia simply nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement, not agreement, and made her way towards the backstage area. She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't defend her right to be there. Her dignity was a shield they could not penetrate with their petty insults. Unseen by them, an old man sitting in a shadowed alcove had watched the entire exchange. His name was Maestro Julian Vance, the legendary conductor and the head judge of the competition. His eyes, which had seen 1,000 performances and dissected 1,000,000 notes, did not see a faded dress. They saw an unflinching spirit. They saw a quiet strength that was more compelling than all the glittering bravado in the hall. He watched Celia disappear behind the heavy velvet curtain, and a slow, thoughtful frown creased his brow. The world had judged her on her cover. Wondered, with a rising sense of anticipation. What music was written on her pages? The backstage area was a chaotic symphony of its own. Anxious performers paced the corridors, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. The air hummed, with the sound of nervous vocal warm-ups, snippets of arias that flew up and vanished into the dusty rafters. Young men in sharp tuxedos adjusted their bodies in cracked mirrors, while women in shimmering gowns gossiped in hushed, competitive tones. Celia found a quiet corner away from the nervous energy and sat on a wooden crate. She opened her portfolio and looked at the music sheet within. The paper was yellowed and soft, the notes written not in printed ink, but in a delicate, fading cursive. It was her mother's handwriting. The song was a simple folk lullaby, one her mother used to sing to her as a child, a melody that held the memory of warmth and unconditional love. It was not a grand, dramatic piece like the one she could hear being practiced around her. It was a piece of her soul. The competition began. The audience settled, a rustle of programs and polite coughs filling the hall. The first contestant, a handsome tenor with a polished stage presence, delivered a flawless but emotionally hollow rendition of a famous opera piece. The applause was loud, appreciative, but mechanical. Mrs. Cromwell, seated in the front row next to Maestro Vance, nodded in approval. "Excellent technique," she murmured to him, loud enough for those around them to hear. "He trained in Milan, you know." Cromwell Foundation scholarship recipient. Maestro Vance simply nodded, his face impassive. His eyes were closed, as if he were listening for something beyond the notes. He heard perfection, but he did not feel truth. Performer after performer took the stage, soprano whose high notes were as brilliant and as cold as ice. A baritone with a powerful, booming voice that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall, yet left the heart unmoved. They were all technically proficient, all products of the finest schools and the most demanding teachers. They were like flawless, mass-produced statues, beautiful to look at, but lacking the vital spark of life. Isadora, sitting behind her mother, provided a running commentary of sneers. "Her vibrato is all over the place," she'd whisper, straining for that note. "How embarrassing." Her judgment was as swift and merciless as her mother's. With each performance, a subtle sense of disappointment began to settle. Over the hall, the audience was impressed, but not moved. They were witnessing skill, but not art. Backstage, Celia listened. She heard the power, the training, the ambition in every voice. But she also heard the fear, the desperate need for approval. She closed her eyes and focused on the memory of her mother's voice, a voice that never sought to impress, only to soothe, a voice that was as natural and as necessary as breathing. Stagehand, a grizzled man with kind eyes, walked past and saw her sitting there, so still and calm amidst the chaos. He stopped. "You're next, miss. Number 27. Celia looked up, and a small, gentle smile touched her lips. "Thank you." As the previous performer took their final bow to the same polite, yet unenthusiastic applause, Mrs. Cromwell leaned towards the maestro again. "Well, Julian, it seems we have another year of very competent, if uninspired, singers." She sighed dramatically. "And now I believe we have our little charity case. Let's get this over with quickly." Maestro Vance opened his eyes. They were sharp and clear. "Patience, Beatrice," he said, his voice a low rumble.
Sometimes the greatest storms are preceded by the quietest calm."
He looked towards the wings of the stage, his gaze intense. On the giant screen that showed the contestants backstage, Celia's face appeared. A wave of confused murmuring rippled through the audience. They saw her plain dress, her unadorned hair, her serene face.
Eyes.
They saw someone who did not belong. The camera lingered on her for a moment, and in that moment the entire hall was united. In a single, unspoken question, "What is she doing here?" The announcer's voice boomed through the hall, formal and detached. Contestant number 27, Celia, performing The River's Lament. A few titters of laughter could be heard from the audience. The title sounded provincial, unsophisticated, compared to the grand Italian and German arias that had preceded it. Isadora leaned forward and whispered to a friend, "The River's Lament. How quaint." I'm sure it's a tragedy. Celia walked from the darkness of the wings into the blinding white light of the stage. For a moment, she was just a silhouette, a simple shape against the overwhelming brilliance. As she moved towards the center, the light revealed her fully. The faded gray dress, the worn shoes, the complete absence of jewelry. She looked small and fragile in the vast empty space. The murmuring grew louder. People exchanged glances, some amused, some embarrassed for her. Mrs. Cromwell fanned herself, her expression one of utter mortification. She looked at the other patrons as if to say, "This is not my fault." Celia did not look at the audience. She did not look at the judges' table where Mrs. Cromwell sat, radiating scorn. She looked only at Maestro Vance. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. He gave her the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It was not pity. It was encouragement. It said, "Show them." She took her position, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She took a single deep breath, filling her lungs with the stale, expectant air of the concert hall. And then she closed her eyes. The world, with its judgment and its noise, vanished. There was only the song. The silence stretched for a heartbeat, a moment of pure, agonizing suspense. Then the first note left her lips. It wasn't loud, wasn't forceful. It was soft, as gentle as mist rising from a river at dawn, but it had a quality that silenced the entire hall in an instant. The note was so pure, so perfectly pitched, so filled with a raw, aching emotion that it seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the chest. It was the sound of truth. The murmuring stopped. The fidgeting ceased. 1,000 people held their breath as one. Isadora's smug smile froze on her face and slowly dissolved into slack-jawed disbelief. Mrs. Cromwell's fan stilled in her hand, her eyes wide with a shock that stripped away her layers of arrogance. The song began to unfold. It was a simple melody, but in Celia's voice, it became a universe of feeling. It told the story of a river that had witnessed love and loss, of seasons passing, of a deep, abiding sorrow that was also a form of peace. Her voice swelled, not with the force of technical training, but with the power of genuine emotion. It rose and fell, carrying the weight of generations of untold stories. It was the sound of a heart breaking and healing all at once. The camera panned across the faces in the audience. The initial scorn and amusement were gone, replaced by a universal expression of stunned wonder. People leaned forward in their seats, their bodies unconsciously drawn towards the source of that incredible sound.
Ow.
A woman in the third row, dressed in a fortune's worth of diamonds, wiped a tear from her eye, oblivious to her mascara. Elderly man sat with his head bowed, his shoulders shaking gently. They were not just hearing a song, they were feeling it. They were remembering their own loves, their own losses. Celia's voice was a key, unlocking rooms in their hearts they had long since sealed shut. At the judges' table, the transformation was absolute. The other two judges, who had been scribbling clinical notes all night, had put their pens down. They were simply listening, their faces a mixture of professional awe and personal surrender. Maestro Vance. He had leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed, a profound, serene smile on his face. This was it. This was what he had been waiting for his entire life. A single, perfect tear traced a path through the wrinkles at the corner of his eye and fell, unheard, onto the velvet tablecloth. He was not crying from sadness. He was crying from beauty. The final note of the song hung in the air, a shimmering, perfect sphere of sound. It did not end abruptly. It faded slowly, gracefully, like the last ray of sunlight at dusk, leaving an imprint of its warmth long after. It was gone. For a full 10 seconds after the sound had vanished, there was absolute, unbroken silence. It was not an empty silence. It was a sacred one, filled with the echo of what they had just heard. The entire hall seemed to be in a trance, held captive by the ghost of that voice. Celia slowly opened her eyes, the harsh reality of the stage lights flooding back in. She looked out into the darkness and performed a simple, humble bow, her hands clasped, and then the silence broke. It was not applause. It was an explosion, a roar. Every single person in the Corinthian concert hall, from the wealthy patrons in the front row to the ushers standing by the doors, leaped to their feet. The sound was deafening, a tidal wave of pure, unrestrained emotion. It was not the polite, measured clapping of earlier. It was a visceral, heartfelt ovation, a sound of gratitude and wonder. People were cheering, shouting brava, their faces alight with a joy that was almost spiritual. Celia stood, slightly overwhelmed by the force of their reaction, a faint, shy smile on her lips. She had not sung for them. She had sung for her mother, for herself. But in sharing that private truth, she had touched a universal one. The camera found Mrs. Cromwell. Her face was a ruin of conflicting emotions. The shock had given way to a pale, panicked confusion. Her entire worldview, built on a foundation of pedigree, wealth, and superficiality, had just been demolished. By a girl in a faded dress? She was clapping, but it was a mechanical, desperate gesture, an attempt to seem like she had been in on it all along. It was a pathetic sight. Isadora was frozen, her mouth still slightly agape, staring at the stage. As if she had just seen a miracle she couldn't possibly comprehend. The applause went on, refusing to die down. Finally, Maestro Vance stood up. He did not clap. He raised his hand and slowly, reluctantly, the hall fell silent again, the energy still crackling in the air. He picked up his microphone, his hand trembling slightly. He looked not at the audience, but directly at Celia. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with emotion. "In my 50 years of judging music," he began, his voice resonating with deep authority, "I have heard the most technically perfect voices in the world. I have heard power. I have heard precision." He paused, his eyes locking with hers.
Aunt!
Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, I did not just hear a singer. I heard a soul. A fresh wave of applause erupted, but he held up his hand again. "We have rules. We have scoring criteria for pitch, for tone, for difficulty. To score what we have just heard would be an insult to it." He turned to the other judges, who nodded in fervent agreement. He turned back to Celia. "We are not judges of this. Are merely witnesses." He then did something no one had ever seen him do. He stepped down from the judge's platform, walked to the edge of the stage, and bowed to her. It was a gesture of profound respect, from a master to a master. The audience roared its approval once more. In that moment, the competition was over. The other contestants waiting in the wings knew it. They weren't even disappointed. They were simply in awe. Later, as Celia was being mobbed by well-wishers and reporters who had suddenly materialized, Mrs. Cromwell, having composed herself, pushed her way through the crowd. "My dear girl," she said, her voice oozing a false syrupy warmth, a magnificent performance. "Truly, the Cromwell Foundation would be honored to sponsor your future. We saw your potential from the very beginning." Celia looked at her. Her gaze was not angry, not triumphant. It was simply clear. She offered a small, polite nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Cromwell," she said, her voice the same soft, steady tone it had been hours before. "But I think my mother's sponsorship is all I will ever need." And with that, she turned away, leaving Beatrice Cromwell standing alone in the crowd. Her offer hanging in the air like a sour note, her irrelevance complete. Celia's life changed that night, but not in the way most people expected. She turned down the lucrative recording contracts and the offers of world tours. Instead, she accepted a position funded by a trust Maestro Vance, established in her name, teaching music to underprivileged children in the forgotten parts of the city. She knew that a voice was not a weapon for fame, but a gift for healing. And sometimes, in a small sunlit room filled with the eager faces of children, she would sing the river's lament. And everyone who heard it would understand that the most beautiful music in the world doesn't come from a grand stage, but from a heart that has known both sorrow and love, and has learned to sing about both with unflinching honesty. The world had seen a simple woman and heard a masterpiece. It was a lesson the Corinthian concert hall, and all who were there that night would never forget.